I think we got to speak about Tammy Abraham because it's been discussed for about a week now. Maybe it's died down, but there was so much talk last week about his contract situation, about the future, about him not getting many minutes so far under Thomas Tuchel. Now we have the false nine, which doesn't really help either Olivier Giroud or Tammy Abraham. If we look better without a natural striker, it's not going to help either of those players, at least for the rest of this season. What do you make of Tammy and his whole situation? Because I think it is quite concerning, and I don't think there are many more underappreciated players in this current squad, in my opinion.
No, I've said it repeatedly. Tammy Abraham's a Champions League level striker, and that is just a fact, really. If he's not a Champions League level, he's a top Europa League striker, and people are very much, no, he's not that good, blah, blah, but actually he is that good. And if you score 16 non-penalty goals in your first Premier League season, that's pretty impressive. And he still contributes meaningfully, and he has done this season. Obviously, when he plays in the team, our points per game is at the highest still, but I think that will probably decrease over time just because that he's not playing very regularly and we're consistently winning games now. But with Tammy, man, it's kind of like he's not going to be a superstar striker, is he? Like, let's be very realistic. I don't see Tammy as being, I don't see Tammy's peak as the same level as, say, what Lukaku's is now. I'm not comparing them as a player. I'm just comparing their peak because they're different players. I don't see him being a, 300-400 career goal striker. However, what I do see is a player there that's extremely talented. If a club signs him, they're going to improve. And also, I think he can offer you something that a lot of players don't have. And I do think he's slightly disrespected by the Chelsea fan base, and that's a shame because obviously he's a Cobham boy and he loves the club. But what I take from it is if he's not going to be playing regularly, I like him well enough, and I always say this about players that, especially that come from the academy, that maybe don't always, I don't want to say not make it, because I think Tammy's made it at Chelsea, kind of. But I want him to have the best career for him. And if that means not being at Chelsea, then it's not being at Chelsea. And he's actually smart enough, I think, to understand that. And evidently what he wants to do is be starting football games and scoring goals. And he knows, he's looked at the players around him that are in his circles, whether it's even people like Reece Oxford, mate, who everyone forgets about now, but he's a starting centre-back in the Bundesliga side. And it's very easy to forget because we live in, FIFA world and stats world, and, it's all about numbers, and we all look at Messi and we all look at everyone else. Like, to be a starting footballer in a top league is like the highest level you can reach, pretty much. Do you know what I mean? To play for Burnley, for example, you have to be such a good football player. It's not an easy thing to do. Just because they're not as good as Man City doesn't mean they're poor players. And Tammy, I think he could quite easily play. I would like him at Leipzig, for example, because I think Sorloth's rubbish. And I think he could replace Sorloth. I know Hajir is very keen for him to be at Dortmund as a Haaland replacement. I'm not sure I can see it, but I imagine he would probably do all right over there. If he wants to stay in England, I know that Everton have been looking at him if Calvert-Lewin leaves, but I don't think Calvert-Lewin's going to leave. I don't see who buys him because he's going to be really expensive anyway. Obviously, everyone chats about West Ham. I like it, but I think West Ham are kind of having a purple patch season. I don't see them being this good next season. Do you know what I mean?
You think the future of Rice and maybe even Souček could be up for debate as well? If they can't maintain those two players, if they can't keep them for the next couple of years, that's going to take a lot out of that team.
100%, and we see it consistently with players like Mikel Antonio as well, who's an absolutely brilliant player and I think should be considered by England. I don't know if he'd make it, but he should definitely be considered. Is that players like that, they tend to burn out because they rely so much on their physical abilities. He's exceptionally quick and he's a problem, and he's strong, but he's also technically gifted. So West Ham works, but is it the longest term solution? Because with West Ham, they're one of those teams that one season will be sixth and the next season will get relegated. So it depends. But there are definitely places for him, and he should really aim to get the best career move for him, not just be at Chelsea. And he's done enough for the club to respect him, and I think the fans generally respect him. It's more just, is he the player to win you a Champions League, maybe not. And I think that's the type of player that maybe a lot of younger Chelsea fans are aiming for. I don't know about the slightly older ones.
It feels to me to be a same old story of a young player. He's at a club that is demanding a lot in a short space of time, and he knew that, right? I think all these young players know the expectation level on them. They know. I think there's a lot of simplistic arguments being made at the moment surrounding Tammy in the case of, well, doesn't he want to compete? Does he not have the right mentality to compete? But, Drogba competed with a lot of strikers during his career. I just think for him personally, he's probably looking at it and going, probably not now, because if he's not getting in the team, he's not going to be able to score goals. But he could have ended this season and could still end this season as our top goal scorer again after the club invested very heavily on attacking players last season. He did it last season as well.
It's going to be Jorginho, bro.
Yeah, it's probably going to be. It probably will be Jorginho. And the club once again could go out and spend big on another forward. At some point, as a young player, he's going to think this club is never going to be the sort of club where I'm going to be able to get that time and patience just objectively to play regularly, to go from a 12 to 15 to 18 goal a season striker to potentially at 26, 27, if all things go well, become a better striker than that. I mean, statistically, he was 2 goals off Diego Costa's first season. Now, I'm not saying that Tammy Abraham is as good as Diego in his prime. That's a ridiculous statement. But what I'm saying, if you're looking at his age, I think I've had this conversation with you before. I just think that, unfortunately, for a wide array of young players, especially in English football right now, players like Mbappe and Haaland really do not help young players. Because people take those anomaly, freakishly good talents and go and extrapolate it and go, well, why aren't our young talents like that?
Yeah, they normalise it.
They normalise it as if this is some sort of thing that happens regularly. There's a reason why generational is another one of these terms that do not bring out the klaxon. Generational is another one of these terms that has been overused to death on so many players. But there's a reason why I think it very much suits Haaland and Mbappe, because at their age, they're doing ridiculous things. They are just doing ridiculous things. And every player develops differently. You make the comparison to Diego at the same age Tammy is now. I think he was on loan from Atletico Madrid. Barely anyone knew his name. Tammy Abraham has been scoring goals pretty consistently for Chelsea in the Premier League. I just think for me, I just want a little bit more context and also appreciation of a young player who has had a lot of pressure on him to perform at, Chelsea standards, whatever they are. And he's, I think, done very well. And when you compare him, you talk about the non-penalty goals, because of course he doesn't take penalties for us, and you match them up with a lot of great strikers who are older than him in this league, consistent strikers in this league, he fares pretty well. And to me, I can talk about, people talk about his game, elements of his game, maybe not being sharp enough, his anticipation to run across the box of crosses. He should be better at that, yes, as a young player. But when you show me those objective stats right there, I think, would I have expected more when he came in the summer of 2019? No, actually. I think he's maybe achieving a little bit more than I expected from him at this point. And unfortunately, I think this team lacks goals, and people are just willing to let those goals walk out the door. Now, unless we can bring in Erling Haaland, who then does score us 30 goals a season, it's people. The way people talk about Tammy, it's like we still have Diego. It's like we still have Didier in this team. It's like we have bundles of goals everywhere. And it was a conversation we were having the other day. If Tuchel can suddenly find and make this team a lot more productive, then okay. But we're not in that current moment, are we? And I worry that if you want Tammy to be sold and he turns out to be a brilliant striker in a few years, and Chelsea don't have a striker in a few years who can score us goals, then don't turn around and moan. That's sort of my point on it.
Mate, that's what it is. That's what it is. And, hopefully he gets the chance somewhere to be given a consistent run for the whole season, because he fully deserves that. Actually, he deserves it more than a lot of young players. And the difference with Tammy is he's 23, I think, so he's like slightly older than the sort of younger English talent crop. He sort of finds himself in the middle. But he deserves a whole season at somewhere, a team. If it's not going to be Chelsea, he deserves a whole season to really show what he can do, because it seems as though when he plays consistently, all he does is score goals. And I said this, for people that don't watch the Championship and think about it as the English second league, whatever. It's not a joke league. The Championship is like a serious league with massive teams in it. It's the third most watched league in the world. It's not small by any means, and he scored 26 goals that season in the Championship. And Championship players now are serious players in the Premier League. It's not how it used to be. And to do that, and then to come to Chelsea and to score 16 without taking penalties, and it's seriously impressive. And I think it's literally because he's a bit odd to watch that people don't.
I think once again it comes back to perception over reality of players, and I could look at many players. Specifically in this Chelsea side, I think, to be fair, I think Jorginho has suffered from this over the years. I think you could argue Andreas Christensen has suffered through this in terms of the perception of him being quite weak. That hasn't been the case over recent weeks. I think people get it in their heads about players. We all have it where we think this is the type of player they are. I actually think if you were to look at stats, if you were to actually analyse Tammy's performances, a lot of people have a go at him for his hold-up play, which I think has improved this season. Because it doesn't look as elegant as Olivier Giroud, people think it's poor, and it's a bit like Edouard Mendy. Because Edouard Mendy doesn't look as elegant on the ball, people don't give him enough credit, and unfortunately that's the case for Tammy. And I think I could show people as many stats as possible to say, actually, based on the normal 23-year-old in this situation, he's actually performing pretty well, and based on the value of Chelsea paying this guy week in, week out, he's actually doing a pretty good job. But unfortunately, people just look at him and go, well, he's not the finished article. He ain't going to win us a Champions League, so we might as well just bin it. And, I think we've had this conversation more than enough, you and I, over recent time of the culture of the club and why there are pitfalls to it. And I find it a bit sad for Tammy, really. And I do hope if he does, I would tell him don't sign the contract. I would literally, if I was in front of him, I'd say, mate, you probably shouldn't sign the contract. Too. This is the smart play for you. Smart play, don't sign the contract. You know what this club is like. They're already looking at Erling Haaland. They're the next summer they'll probably be looking at someone else. If you leave the summer after, you can go with your head held high that you've made it at your boyhood club. You've scored quite a few goals for the club. And he'll use it as motivation, a bit like Lukaku did, to go somewhere else. Whether he can excel to that level, I don't know, because players, this is another thing, we don't know of young players because they develop at so many different ages, especially strikers. Costa developed very late in his career, and he had a purple patch for about 2 or 3 seasons, right? And Chelsea were lucky to have some of that. We don't know, by the age of 27, 28, Tammy Abraham will find the right coach, the right manager, the right system, the right culture of a club that gives him that time, and he suddenly thrives.
Well, Lewandowski strikes me as a player like that as well. Like, even when he signed at Dortmund, I know under Klopp, like, I specifically remember the game against Real Madrid in the Champions League. Like, that for me was him announcing himself. But at that point, he was 26. He's 31 now, and he's still the best striker on the planet, in my opinion, anyway. Besides Lukaku and Harry Kane. So strikers develop later than people think, and you're right. The fact that people normalise what Haaland and Mbappe and what Sancho do is not how it's done. And even when Messi broke out of Barcelona, you didn't see people saying about other 19-year-olds should be as good as Messi. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't work that way for the majority of people. And football's it's a short career in terms of life, but actually 10 years is a long time, and people learn and develop and grow through different situations. And I totally agree with you. If Tammy was sat here on this podcast, I'd say to him, don't sign the contract, because you can get regular first team football wherever you go, and that is where you want to be to ensure that you reach your peak.